Just got off a call with a prospective client, and he basically wanted a whole system about how to run his life. He's already doing some internal work, already doing shadow work, already doing meditation, learning from some good mentors that actually my client gave him some recommendations for, and I gave him some recommendations for that as well. But like a lot of logical guys, and like a lot of people that use their head a lot, so he's a lawyer, he's clearly very smart, it got him where he is now, very successful, all of that kind of good stuff. When you're moving from a different paradigm, when you're moving from, listen, I've already got success, I've got the career that I wanted, you know, it's respected by society. A lawyer is a respected job by society, you know. If you're a bit of an entrepreneur, especially in the beginning phases of an entrepreneur, then you don't have that benefit. But as a lawyer, you get to say, I'm a lawyer, and it gets instant respect. You have all of this kind of stuff. The external stuff is working. Even some of the internal stuff is working too, because that's what he was interested in already before seeing me. He just, like a lot of people, there's so much stuff out there from so many different people who are good at using their words to elicit interest rather than just having good content or actionable stuff. He was getting lost in the internal work, but that wasn't even the main issue, because that can be sold pretty straightforward with the right frameworks, which stuff is I'm giving on this, both in my free product, the whole reason I made my free product is so that people don't get lost in shadow work, which is where they can cause the most harm to themselves. But it's also in my YouTube stuff, it's because it's structured in a way where it gives you the right frameworks. His issue is something which I see so many more logical, more successful in a certain area people have, which is trying to understand a practice, whether it's a socializing practice, whether it's or just kind of like a meditation, inner work, shadow work practice where you're subjectively changing your state in an objective way. What that basically means is it's the subjective state, but you feel day to day much better, much more empowered, much more in control of how you're feeling, and not so reactive to the external ebbs and flow of life, which are going to be there whether you want it to be there or not. Is that his issue was he was trying to do all of the doing stuff from the doing paradigm, which is I gotta work, do this, I gotta understand all the procedures. Especially as a lawyer, you have to learn like so many ins and outs. People are gonna try and test you. There's gonna be so many blind spots and clauses you're gonna have to understand, so many technicalities. That's such a phenomenal tool. We are not trying to demonize the mind in this way, like so many inner work or spiritual teachers I see are doing, unfortunately. But essentially, we are setting that aside for the moment, and we are learning a deeper skill. So for his thing, he wanted to learn a lot about meditation. Because for that, in his words, it was a gateway to getting into all this inner work stuff, making sure that he had all of his I's dotted and his T's crossed. But one of the questions he asked me is, how do I know that I'm using this system properly? Because I gave him a whole system, I gave him the right practice, I gave him the right intentions to look at, I gave him how to set up his practice in the most effective way possible so that he just gets more calm and less reactive and more responsive and more empowered as a result, rather than the end goal of meditation. Because if that's your end goal, it's kind of like, you know, you aim for the ceiling and maybe you'll get off the floor rather than aiming for the stars. In a meditation aspect, that would be trying to attain the final liberation from suffering. Then you'll get to the moon, right? And that's where all of that cool stuff happens, and it makes it much more effective, much more efficient, and much faster as well. Doesn't mean that it's any of those things in and of themselves, but it makes it more efficient, fast. Basically doesn't hurt your progress. And his question that he asked me was, like I said, how do I do all of this stuff? How do I make sure that I'm doing all of this stuff? And it just made it so clear to me that there's his mind trying to help him, and it's helpful in a way. But when you're doing a more esoteric practice, even though the results that you get from it are very practical and very long-lasting and permanently transformative, like you actually change as a person, that's because these practices are extremely deep. Despite all of that, if you're going to go to that, if you're going in that direction, you need to set aside that aspect which you've trained a lot and go into a more being style practice. Now, a being style practice basically putting lipstick on myself from this milk. Going into a being style practice is when you are holding the mind, you're allowing it to do whatever you want to do. We're not suppressing it. And when I say mind, this also counts as an emotional state too. We're allowing that to be there, but it's being held in something which is greater, i.e. awareness. Now, if we want to get technical, it's all happening in the brain, right? I'm not trying to say it's not happening in the brain for those of people that are more logically minded, but the aspect of awareness is another form of intellect, it's another form of intelligence, it's another form of way of using mind you can use it. I prefer to use awareness as something separate in the mind because it makes the distinctions much, much easier. But when you're in this practice, it's the practice which is going to give you the most answers that you can ever hope to achieve understanding of just theoretically. You have to dive in, you have to go into the deep end. And I think this relates to so many people who have issues that I work with when it comes to fully owning themselves when they're socializing, in dating, in relationships, both romantic and friendships, or when it comes to fully owning what they want and stepping out of the constructs that their family has placed them in terms of what their expectations are to be, like a doctor, all this kind of good stuff. So many people, so many questions will be answered by just taking that leap of faith and just jumping into the deep end of life, so to speak. That is why a showing up practice is so, so important. Or as the Zen teacher, Doshin Roshi says, a fucking up practice. You need to be okay with fucking up a little bit more. A lot of the guys and the girls that I work with, they are super into shadow work and they get great results. But what's holding them back from making that last 20%? Now 20% is not the majority, but it's a big part, 20%. We much rather have 20% positive than negative, right? It's a big difference. What's stopping that is just exposing yourself to the fullest of life's highs and lows. Does that mean that Aaron Zarita from Self-Actualization Systems is suddenly suggesting that you should become homeless? No, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm also not suggesting to refer to yourself in third person. I'm doing that ironically. Hopefully that comes across in the video. I don't actually talk about myself like this. But what it means is sometimes going out, taking a little bit of risk, having a little bit of adventure. So this was one of the principles which kind of got introduced to me. I mean, it was there kind of innately in me. For some reason, I've just always been a bit more risk. I've been less risk adverse and more pleasure seeking than I had the opposite way around. But how this got illustrated beautifully for me was by my mentor when he was doing, his name's Pierre de Souza. In an old program he no longer teaches, the 5 principles of social sage, of being a socializing sage, or we can just call that the 5 principles of masculine polarity in a tantric sense. So tantra outside of the bedroom. The 5th principle and the most masterful principle of socializing, but I'm applying this to life, is something called dancing with the feminine. Now the feminine is anything that's chaotic, is anything which is alive. This voice right now is part of the feminine. My style is part of the feminine. This body is part of the feminine. Everything that is something is a part of the feminine. It's the masculine that holds everything in. You can think of the masculine almost like what was happening before the big banners. Again, another, what Pierre used to say, when you're in this situation, by embracing dancing with the feminine, in another sense, embracing the chaos, that's when you get to a mastery level. That's when you get to the deepest level of practice that you can attain, or that you can practice, right? You never really attain it, it's a practice. That's why it's called a practice and not a perfection. So the reason why this sparked it in me is because what I said to this guy on the call, and I mean, he took it super well. It wasn't like me calling him out or anything like that. He was very open, and you know, it was probably confirming a conclusion which he had already drawn a bit. It just hadn't been spoken out. Again, I don't want to speak for his experience, but that's kind of the sense that I got. Is I was like, you just kind of have to dive into the practice and then figure it out. Dive in and then troubleshoot. And he was like, yeah. And that's the same with everything, guys. Socializing, that's the same with my shadow work product. It's 3 hours of content. There's no shortage of information in there, trust me. And it's a live stream too. Attended to by my 2 one-on-one clients, by 2 of my one-on-one clients, who are already very advanced if they got to the stage where they actually wanted to do coaching with me, because not everyone finds what I'm saying very interesting, which is perfectly fine. And they're asking me questions. There's no shortage of complexity, of theory, of principles, hopefully. And if there is, if you watched it, then please send me a message and I'll be happy to add something to that product for free, because it's a free product. But at the end of the day, you just have to do it, right? Nike really was right. You just have to do it. You just have to go out there and do something. You have to really embrace the showing up aspect of your life. Now, that's the same for a competitor. You know, one of my clients is a competitor. He's competing much more now. When he just got to black belt, which is what most people think is the end point, he now at black point is just now, black belt, not black point, him now at black belt is just stepping into doing these competitions more and more and more. Black belt is the start of his journey, right? Why I'm bringing that up is because you can think that you've done all this practice, all this theory, learned about all the frameworks, done all the meditation, cleaned up all the shadows, and that's amazing, and you will feel a massive difference. You'll feel like a totally different people, and people will start reacting to you different. But until you fully embrace the chaos of life, you can't live in this theoretical map of the world forever. You can't do this clean little practice where you're tucked away without any real stressors. There can be stresses which are self-induced, like boredom, or maybe something's really complex to learn about. Or maybe you can even be a little bit intimidated to actually go into a shadow and open it up. All of that stuff is great, and you will build polarity with that, or you'll build strength for adversity with that. But there is a certain extra pressure where something totally unexpected happens from an outside circumstance that you can't control and you can't even predict. And that's where the greatest lessons are. It's not just in failure, but it's in exposure. And I think this levels out so much of my audience, which are quite logical, or maybe they're not logical, but they're very feeling based, and they need to actually integrate a bit of pushing through adversity when it comes to feeling. I'm basically getting this from all of my one-on-one clients, the unique diaspora that my one-on-one clients are. It rounds out the personality, your vibe, and you just as a person so much more by being okay with not feeling okay, and even being okay with knowing that you're not going to feel okay, not feeling okay. As confusing as that gets, right? You have to embrace it. There's no way around it. Otherwise, in higher stress environments, when things start getting a bit more serious, or you're around people that have had a bit of a crazy life or have had a bit of a crazy upbringing, and they've integrated all of this extra stuff too, there's just a certain extra level that those people are in their vibe, in their impact, in what they believe their capabilities are of being. They just have something extra. This is kind of like the extra nudge that people are looking for, like the spark, if that's what you want to talk about. This is how you get it. And yeah, that's what that sparked for me. I'm sure I'll have some more thoughts on this later today or later down the line. Enjoy.